Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, wherever you're tuning in from. This is the BS Buddies podcast. I'm your host, Joe. That is your host, Ian. And today, we are going to be talking about stories about our grandparents. If you're new to this podcast, please subscribe or follow. We've talked a lot about analogies and like creating the worst restaurant ever, creating very bad superpowers a couple of times. I've talked about an awful landlord I've had. Ian's tried weird snacks from other countries.
While Joe watched.
Yep, while I watched and got jealous. Um, if you're into just kind of random BSery between friends, uh, hit subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. Ian, how are you doing?
Well, as I said earlier, it was frickin' hot today. Side note, interesting topic. We had a tornado warning like 30 miles west of here yesterday because we had some really big storms coming through. So last night, I had like everything was unplugged from the walls. I'm like, I'm not getting any electronics fried tonight. And then I sat by the window with my little hand crank radio, just listening and waiting, and it didn't do nothing. It rained for like a solid hour or two and then it quit. So I was thoroughly disappointed. I was expecting to see the wrath of Mother Nature unfold, and no such luck. Did not occur. We got a little bit of rain. My lawn is now an inch taller because it punishes me for every day that my mower sits underneath the deck. And yeah, life is good. It's generally
Perfect.
pretty good.
Well, we will get into the topic now, and we're just going to kind of talk about kind of whatever comes to mind. I got a few funny stories of my grandparents. Um, I guess I'll start. I got to say that I was really lucky with location wise for my grandparents. So I had my grandpa and grandma, and then who lived across the street from me, literally across the street. And then I had my grandma who lived just one town down, and my second grandfather passed away before I was born. So fortunately, didn't get to meet him, but spent a lot of time with my grandma. And excuse me, I'm not getting choked up, not yet
You're not
anyway.
excused. You're not excused.
Oh, thank you. Um, getting over a cold, but the grandparents across the street, uh, we had the first thing I'll start off with was every Sunday after church, which was across the street the other way. So walk over to church, go to
Yeah,
church.
that long journey down the street, I didn't want to get
Yep.
lost.
And then walk the whole block the other way to my grandparents' house. And every Sunday after church, uh, my grandparents would make lunch and we'd just hang out. If it was summertime, we would watch the Twins after we would eat, or wintertime, we'd watch the Vikings choke. And
I
yeah,
think that's just pretty common in any season.
yeah, pretty much. But that
Ah,
was really the main thing. And who would come over? It was me and my immediate family, and then my aunt and uncle and their immediate family. And it was just a Sunday tradition. I think we'd only miss like 3 times out of the year, maybe. Like
okay.
it
So
was
yeah,
that
he was
common.
pretty regular then. See, that's the good stuff right there. Although my experience was a little bit on the different side because I grew up with my grandparents on my father's side. I shouldn't say I grew up with them. Growing up living on the farm with them, I had a very interesting living arrangement when I was a child. My uncle and my father lived on the farm with my grandparents at the time, and so growing up as a young tyke running about that big farm unsupervised, I saw my grandparents all the time. So for me, it was an interesting concept to see them almost every day and interact with them. But I do know that despite that, I do know that they had some interesting ways of doing things. For example, my grandfather was one of those people who could take a stick of butter and just take
Oh,
a chunk out of it like it was a Snickers bar.
oh,
And that was yeah, I let me put it this way, not once in my life growing up did I ever look at that and think that was normal, even when I saw my grandfather able to do it. And I'll tell you why, because I tried it. I tried it when no one was looking, because I wasn't about to get
That's
laughed
fair.
at for biting a stick of butter. But yeah, I remember it's ugh, I can still taste it to this day. I didn't even like grab the stick. I just like cut like a little slice of butter off and popped it in my
Just
mouth and immediately was like, I need a trash can. I need a trash can. Um, but weirdly enough, and I think this is one of the reasons to blame for why I have such weird tastes in food, at least according to everybody else, because there's not a lot that I will say no to. My grandfather used to cook spinach in a pot until it would get into this like mush, and they would use it in other recipes. But one of his favorite things was with me is that we would sneak some. He'd grab a fork and he'd get it in there, so you just get this lump of cooked spinach, and you put a little salt on it or a little butter on it, and then we'd eat it. And yeah, looking back now, that's a very strange thing to just eat straight spinach, but I don't know why. As a little kid, I absolutely loved it, and I think that's why to this day I still like spinach and why I have a weird taste for food. Bubbers, can you stop interrupting when we do these? I'm sorry. I know I keep looking left and right here.
oh
It's
no, you're
because
good.
he's walking underneath me, moving around and around.
But speaking of that, not the cat. Um,
Speaking of,
my grandma on my mom's side apparently would just, on occasions when I was really young, would just feed me straight ketchup, and that's what I would have. And apparently, I loved it.
I mean, in all reality, it's just tomatoes, maybe with a couple of other things thrown in there, a little bit of sugar, a little bit of salt. I forget how they what they use to make it into a goop, but yeah, you were just eating tomatoes.
Mm,
It was good for
yeah.
you, clearly.
I don't know why this. I think just thinking back, another thing I would do during the summers, um, I would go outside in the morning, play baseball with my second cousin who lived in town. And then after that was done, or I would just play outside until about 10 o'clock. Then I would go over to my grandparents so we could watch The Price is Right for an hour. And I would do that
When
religiously throughout the summer.
when they still had Bob Barker on there.
Yep, I got pretty
Oh
good at it.
yeah. Well, come on up here, spin the wheel, and you're sitting there at 8 years old, like, come on, 99 cents, 99 cents.
I don't think I
Oh
cared
man.
too much about the wheel. I just cared about guessing all the numbers correctly.
You just wanted to guess the price is correct on the thing. Had to fix my camera there. Sorry,
And,
I phased out of reality for a second.
and I wanted to see people pop off in the mini games.
Oh yeah, those ones are always. Some of the mini games that they had on there were pretty fun to try from home. I used to watch that, and I remember my grandparents had one of them old CRT box TVs. It was like a little like an 18 inch or something like that. It was big for back in the day, and used to watch the news on that in the morning, and it had the VCR in the TV, and we had a set of like I don't know 10 or 12 VHS tapes. I couldn't even tell you what all of them are off the top of my head, but I used to just watch those tapes all the time. I'm pretty sure I had some of those tapes memorized, whether they were full blown movies, documentaries, whatever it was. I watched it just because I had nothing else to do out there. Oh,
Um, Speaking of TVs, just things are popping back into my memory. Um, we're like, if you know me, I'm big into baseball, and that's because I come from a huge baseball family. My grandparents even said that they met during a baseball game. So that's how big it was uh, on my dad's side. And back in the day, when my grandpa played for the town team, apparently after the game, they invited the whole team over to go watch the moon landing in my grandparents' house. So the whole baseball
hey,
team got to watch the moon landing in 1969.
now that's something. That'd be pretty cool to see right there. Hey, everybody, we played the game. Come inside. And you imagine TVs back then, man, they were like, it's just a tiny little screen on that thing. You imagine everybody in there crowding around. Are they gonna land? It's Ah, that's a cool little piece of history right there. My grandparents, I think, on the farm that I was growing up on, they were at least my grandfather, he would help run the farm a little bit and do chores. But I do remember, and this kind of ties in with the story, because one year they put a little bridge. See, on one edge of the property, there was this little tiny creek that just flowed real lazily back and forth through the woods. And they wanted to put a hunting stand in the marsh across the creek. And so they went down there and they did like a log bridge across it or whatever. And when I was a little tiny guy running around, and I'd ask one of my buddies to come over, uh, we'd often go down there and say, "Oh, come look at this." You go across the little bridge and walk right up there, and boom, now you're in the hunting stand. Oh, this is really cool. But one year we go down there, and in the springtime, the snowmelt had risen high enough that it flooded the creek, and one side of the bridge, the side that was on our side of the embankment, picked up off the ground and like sank into the creek. So half of the bridge is submerged. Now, this is not a very wide creek. It's maybe, I don't know, 10 feet across, but it's just wide enough to make it a tricky jump for a couple of 10-year-olds looking for trouble. And so I remember that we made it across that bridge. And we went up, we were in the little stand for a while, like, "Oh, this is fun." And then it's time to go back. And we get to the edge of the bridge, and jumping back was a lot harder than jumping to the bridge. 'Cause jumping to the bridge, we were coming from the higher embankment onto the lower
Oh
bridge. Now
no.
we're jumping from the lower bridge to the higher embankment. So I managed to make the jump just barely. I think my foot got a little bit soaked. We'll call him Melvin. Melvin, he can't make that jump, and he doesn't want to try to make that jump. So then comes the suggestion of, well, what if you take off your shoes, roll your pants up, and just wade across the creek? This creek can't be very deep, as the water was a little muddy. We couldn't quite tell where the bottom was, but we're like, oh, this tiny little creek. It can't be
What
that
could
deep.
go wrong?
A lot, apparently, because Melvin took one step forward and sank up to his knees, and took one more step forward and promptly sank up to his waist in mud. And to top it off, those little green reeds that grow in real swampy areas, you can kind of use them like a straw if you break them off. Yeah, one of those things had hit the underside of his big toe and gave him a little bit of a cut on the underside of it. So now he's hollering in pain on the other side of the embankment. I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? So my genius plan was I walked the quarter mile back up to the farmhouse, dug around in the garage, found my toboggan, big long sled, brought it down to the water, and I just like plopped it on the water. And I'm like, I'll hold this in, and then you just jump on the toboggan and run before it sinks. And hey, we managed to get him back. We got back up to the house, and it was just, we will never speak of this. Because we were terrified. We didn't want to get in trouble for messing around the hunting stand when we shouldn't have been. Uh, those were the fun days of running around unsupervised. Not in one of several adventures that
Yeah,
I won't say went wrong, but went a little wonky.
definitely have plenty of those. Um, I do want to just point out as well, because I mean, I'm wearing this shirt, which made me think of it. Both my grandpa and Ian's grandpa fought in wars, and we just have Memorial Day. I have a freedom. Freedom is not free, like Korean War memorial shirts for my grandfather. Uh, just wanted to point that or throw that out there as well. Um,
Yeah.
Couple of tough dudes.
Oh yeah. I I remember there was one time. It's funny that you bring that up because there was one time my cousins came out and they had just gotten this new handgun. It was like a 40. It was a 1911 copycat. It was a pistol that looked a lot like the 1911, but I forget who the manufacturer of it was now. And they were really excited about it. They wanted to try it out a little bit, and we had this gravel pit out at the farm. So, all right, well, let's go down there and try it out. And I remember that my grandfather, he came out with us when we went to go do this one. And at first he just kind of wanted to sit back and just watch, make sure nobody was going to hurt themselves. He wasn't that interested. But then they offered him. They're like, "Well, you want to give it a try?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'll see if I remember my training that they gave us in the army way back in the day." And up to this point, my cousins, everybody had been going up to fire this pistol, was doing with the proper hand placement, where it was one hand on the handguard and the other one's holding underneath, so they're real steady and stable, and everyone's being super safe. And then my grandfather comes up and he's eating a pear, and he he just grabs the handgun while he's eating the pear, and he like holds the pear for a second, checks it, it's okay, it's loaded, and then just bites the pear with one hand and with the other hand aims in and just boom, 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 and pops off all 7 rounds within like 10 seconds as he's sitting there. And he's like, "Yep, that's about how I remember it." Well, all right.
I wasn't
And he made all 7 on target, so he didn't miss.
I wasn't told too much from my grandpa's time in Korea, but the only thing that I know, because me and my cousins asked him, that this dude was great. We we went up to him and we're like, how was fighting in Korea? All he says was, it was cold as shit, and that's all I know.
That's all you got.
He never went into detail. He never had like any big stories or talked about the guys he was with. No, it was cold.
It was cold. Honestly, that's probably all there was to say about that. It was cold.
Debbie pointed out one thing to me. That's why I was kind of rummaging around. Uh, so my grandma had an M&M jar that it was always on the counter. So whenever you came in, you could grab some M&Ms, and it was this pretty. It was like a rainbow-ish, like mesh color. I don't know. I'm not doing it justice, but it had a certain shape to it, and all the older grandchildren, when they were like, they were saying, "Oh, when grandma passes, I want it. No, I want it. No, I want it." Me, I'm like, there's no way. I'm the second youngest. There's no way I'm getting it. So I never had it in the back of my mind. And back in 2018, when we did our that side of the family Christmas, we started doing White Elephant. And not this past year, but the previous year, I participated, and it's a lot of fun. But I got probably the best present I could have asked for, which I have right here.
I hear it
It's
clinking.
it's the same exact shape in a blue of what the jar used, or I think my oldest cousin has the jar technically, but it's the same shape, same type of
Same design.
jar
It's a
as the
copycat,
original.
but in blue.
Yes, and I love this thing.
Do you use it to hold your M&Ms?
I put Skittles in it before. I'm
Traitor. Absolute
I
traitor.
I
How could
have
you? You sullied the reputation
I did
of
put M and M's in
Jar.
it first, but then I switched to Skittles at one point.
Good,
So
it was christened properly then.
it did live up. I have a few stories. I don't know how much more you got, but I got three stories otherwise.
Go for it.
Okay.
Go for it. Because the only
So
other thing I have is when I was working out at my grandparents on my mom's side, and I would basically did day labor out there. So that's all I got.
and I haven't talked about my grandma too much. I spent a lot of time after school at her place and playing checkers, and that's where I learned how to play a lot of card games. So it was just a lot of that. Um, on my dad's side is where it's more like the wacky side. I've always said it's like the weird side of the family. But
It's the weird side of the van. It's good to have those two distinguished,
oh
just in
yeah,
case you ever need
that's
to
like
differentiate.
polar opposites most of the time. But on my dad's side, it was after my grandma passed, like a year later. We went. I think how I remember it and how my parents remember it are two different stories. How I remember it, we were coming back from I think Colorado when my sisters lived there. Like we flew back. I stayed at their place for just a couple hours to recharge before I drove back up to Fargo, which wasn't too far. And my dad's like, "Okay, I'm gonna go check on dad." So we're like, "Okay." My grandpa wasn't home, and the car was gone. So
Yeah. Appeared.
my dad walked over to my great aunt's house, which was also across the street from my parents' place. And he's like, "Hey, have you seen him?" And she said, "No." My dad walks out the house. Guess who's rolling up the street? Good old Gramps. Also, at that time, he was like 87, and he was half bionic from the hips down. Like two hips, two knees, and an ankle were replaced, I believe.
So he's
Um,
got them that cyberpunk strength and
yes.
prosthetic limbs like we talked about. Nice.
Um, stops to talk to my dad, rolls down the window, and just goes, "What?" My dad's like, "Where were you?" And he explained that he went to go to see his parents' grave sites out of town. My dad goes, "You know you're not supposed to be driving." And my grandpa goes, "Bullshit." And just tears up back to his house.
Ah, heaven forbid a man go out and enjoy a drive in his own vehicle.
Oh, just wait. The second story. Uh, this one's a short one. Um, Same grandpa in his younger days was down at the bar with his buddies, and he decided to ride on the hood of the car going up the street. My grandma saw,
Of course.
and how it was depicted is my grandma ran out in her like cheetah print nightgown, chasing him up the street to go yell at him.
Oh, that's classic right there.
And if that doesn't prove how much of a boss my grandma was, this right here does.
Oh no.
She's also the reason why I have this hummingbird tattoo. If anyone was interested, she was a huge fan of hummingbirds. Um, I think I told you this story, or I might have saved it. I don't remember if I told you. I only found out about the story about a year or two ago, and my sister knew, and I'm like, "Why didn't you tell me?" And she's like, "I thought you knew." And no.
No, not at all.
So my grandma was making chicken that night, and my grandpa was down at the bar. Um, and she's like, "When you come home, we'll have chicken." She waits. He's not home.
Not
Waits.
coming.
Not coming.
Still waiting. Still
And
waiting. Still waiting.
let's just say it was like 6 or 7 o'clock at night.
So we're getting
And
into
we're just gonna guess times roughly. So makes it at that time. And he doesn't get home till probably like 10 or 11. As soon as he walks through the door, my grandma takes the chicken, fully cooked, shows him the chicken, and throws the entire thing away right in front of him and went to bed.
Oh, damn. Now that's how you send a message. You see this? You want it? Too bad. You should have been home earlier.
Oh.
Oh man. Now that's the stuff that makes you chuckle right there. It's like, you know what? Make yourself some ramen if you're hungry.
But they were really great people. Um, got a lot of great memories with them.
Yeah, I just have mostly memories of being a hooligan. I know I was a hooligan. I used to run around like the department stores and stuff, like Menards. You know that big. It's like a Home Depot or a Lowe's for anyone who's not familiar with
For you
Menards. Uh,
Southerners
and
or Westerners.
whenever we used to go there or like in the store, I would run away and I would hide. Like I'd go hide in like the cabinet displays behind shelves. I don't know why I did it. I just thought it
Because
was
it was a
really
kid
funny
thing.
that I thought it was really funny that they couldn't find me. So and I was not one of those kids who like made it super obvious either. No. I was like, here's a crack between two doors that's like this big and it goes out and behind a wall. I can sneak in. I made it impossible to find me. I almost put the store in panic mode a couple of times. So that's all I was a terror for my grandparents. I was a hooligan. It's amazing I got away with as much as I did. Oh,
Well, time for quotes.
I think it is time for quotes. And
Um,
we're like the last couple of times we've had quotes ready to go. We're improving.
I'm actually gonna go with one that my grandma told me. That has stuck with me. Very simple, but straightforward. And she said, if you're gonna do something, do it well. Just if you're gonna do a job, do it well.
Don't half-ass two things, whole-ass one thing.
Yes, Ron. I also think of that one.
That's the first thing that came to mind. You know what? That's way better than the quote I had. I'll just save this one for the next episode. I'm gonna go. That's mine. Don't half-ass two things, whole-ass one thing.
Ron Swanson, Parks and Rec. Great show. But thank you guys for BSing with us. Follow or subscribe to become a bud today. Comment down below if there's any topics you want us to hit. And we'll see you next time. When we talk about probably something a little more not serious.
We'll see you next time when I don't know. We've hit our head against the wall enough, and we can come up with some more ideas. That's
That too.
usually how the process goes. But in the meantime, you just take her easy now.